is we're going to take the wage rates, we're going to take the projected growth analytics and figure out which industries have the lowest barriers to entry, which ones match up closest to the kind of things we know how to do, how can we allocate our resources in a way to put ourselves in a position to be successful, and then use those as the driving clusters. And there are a dozen clusters, and many of them are things that people are honored for here today. Let me congratulate each of you for your business growth. But some of them pair up. So for example, North Carolina is a leader in the plastics business, and you've got some folks who do some plastics works around here. Yet we're a lag in the chemical business. We haven't figured out, and they use the same kind of people. And so why aren't we trying to marry up those two kinds of industries? We're a leader of biopharmaceuticals, and we recognize a number of folks here who are in that space. Yet we're a laggard in medical devices and dental devices. Why aren't we trying to marry up? And so we have those kinds of ones we know we have, and we use the same kind of skill sets, the same kind of workforce, and marry those up and use our efforts to go after those kind of entities around the country who can meet that. We also know that you have to not only know what you're trying to get, but then figure out how to take that to market. So they developed structured go-to-market plans for each of those industries. And I will kind of share with you, this is going to be really hard to read, but one of the things they developed, and we're working to get it fully operational as an app, is a Choose North Carolina app. It's loading emails on me, sorry about that. But it's a tool that every business person in North Carolina ought to have on their phone that gives you the key data points about what North Carolina is, where we're the strongest, where our workforce is, the kinds of things that you can share when you're at a trade convention, when you're talking to potential vendors. When you're looking at what we have to offer, it gives you at your fingertips the skills that you need to talk about what makes North Carolina special. It can be tailored to particular markets. And so this is all a very interactive piece of software that we're going to be sending out across the state for people to be able to use to drive business that they come in contact, because a lot of times the very best sources are the referrals you have of folks within the room. A lot of times your competitors, which isn't a bad thing, because when your competitor shows up, the education system lines up to make sure you got the workforce, and more people come and are attracted to what you do. And historically, you look at what this community is, and it's filled with competitors. We also know we don't have an overarching brand. If you were to ask everybody in this room what's North Carolina's brand, I'd probably get 100 different answers. We used to know what it was. So we've got to figure out exactly what that is and wrap around that brand in a way that we can describe it. Business climate, critical component for how we're able to be competitive across the country. When we look at our tax rates, we had the General Assembly. I don't know if we got members of the legislature here today, but legislature in its wisdom began to lower our both personal and corporate income tax rates, about 2 percentage points on both sides. That is already being understood in the marketplace when companies look about what the cost of business is in North Carolina. It's not where it's not an end point. It's a step in progress to continue to make ourselves more competitive. I'll share a little anecdote. Back in the fall, we had an event where we invited Governor Nikki Haley up from South Carolina to be on a panel with Governor McCrory. And Nikki Haley turned to Pat McCrory and said, "I want to thank you for lowering your income and corporate tax rates." And he kind of quizzically looked at her and said, "What are you talking about?" She says, "Well, now I can go back to my legislature and have them lower ours some more." So we're in a competitive environment where our competition around the country is pegging against what other states do. So our competition is South Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee. Our competition is Colorado. Our competition is California. All those places are making decisions. We also have to make sure that we've got an environment that's easy to do business. We've stolen an idea from the governor of Tennessee called the Office of Regulatory Reduction and Review. This is a place where we can load in issues where regulations are getting between your ability to do business and the regulatory environment that's keeping you from opening your doors, expanding your activity. And that ombudsman role will play a critical role in taking care of those regulatory burdens that sometimes limit what you need to do to grow your company. We know incentives are critical. We wouldn't have Google here, for example, without incentives. And we've got to make sure our incentives are effectively the kind we need. We did a very deep dive on the return on investment on our incentive programs, and we know our JADA grant, for example, is highly valuable. It's got an arbitrary ceiling on it, and there's no reason to cap it, because it's a clawback model that basically takes taxes that you wouldn't have had anyway, and you use those and give a portion of them back to that employer for higher growth. Same thing for 1NC. So we went through that, and we know we've got some gaps. When we're talking about our competition with particularly South Carolina and Virginia and Florida, we don't have a closing fund. We have no way to close that last bit of a deal to make it work. And so we want to go back to the General Assembly and say, give us some power to give the tools we need to be competitive across the map. Another thing, and this is particularly important when you've got disputes in your company, our business courts need to be expanded so you can resolve your disputes quicker. Business courts were brought into the state about 20 years ago. They're now the clog in the system, not the traditional superior court. Everyone wants to go where they have a sophisticated judiciary to resolve their problem. So we want to expand that across the state so you don't have to get it in Raleigh, or one court in Charlotte, one court in Raleigh, in Winston-Salem. This community is a center of innovation and entrepreneurship. We listed the companies here who are recognized today almost to a company. They are unique and innovative in what they do. And part of the trick to grow our economy has to be centered around the kinds of things that will create more of that capital at risk, innovative idea. We are tremendously behind in North Carolina, and I'm not going to pick just on UNC Chapel Hill. I'm picking on NC State, I'm picking on Appalachian, I'm picking on, you pick the university in North Carolina. We are behind in converting our research into jobs. When we compare ourselves to Boulder, to San Jose and the Silicon Valley, to Boston, to Austin, to Nashville, we are behind in taking those ideas, those research grants, and turning them into new companies and new jobs. And we've got to change the way in which we incent our college professors and the researchers to drive that energy back out to create more opportunity. And that's just a mind shift. That's all it is. It's a change in the way we compensate, the change in the way we view the asset, and we think there's some real opportunity to make that work and create real commercial use. We also know we've got an upside-down system in terms of tax credits for venture capital. And so when somebody's doing startup and founder stock, I've got a young son who's an entrepreneur in Atlanta and is in the middle of just finished his first round of financing. He'd love nothing better to be back in North Carolina, but it's a disincentive for him to come here and make his second round of financing in North Carolina because of the way founder stock and venture capital is taxed. And so if we're going to be competitive in that space, we've got to make sure we do the kinds of things that make that work. This is probably music to y'all's ears. We looked at talent and retiree attraction. This is a retiree community in part. We're very close to one of the most beautiful places in North Carolina. A lot of people want to live here when they've kind of banked their pension or sold their company. This is the kind of place they want to be between here and a little bit higher in the mountains. And for oftentimes we haven't really thought through how we go after both that younger creative class and how we find that new retiree. The creative class is oftentimes attracted to places like Asheville and Charlotte and the Research Triangle. But sometimes they want other kinds of things because the amenities are there. They want to be able to get outside. They want to have clean air. They want the kinds of things that make that place special. And so we began to kind of come up with gap analysis for what makes that work and what do we have to do to draw that. We also found out that there were real deficiencies in the way we provide what they need to grow. So we spent some time talking to folks in incubators. And I thought when I asked the question, I said, well, what is it you need? What's the one thing you can't find? I was expecting access to capital. That was the first answer I was expecting. And they said, no, we can't find coders. I said, really? They said, no. He says, we got all sorts of coders. If I want coders in Austin or coders in California, they're all over the place. And he says, the university system is all bogged down in mainframe. They're doing Oracle and they're doing Microsoft. No one's doing Java and C++, whatever all those languages are. And we've had to go to Wake Tech to come up with a program that can turn it around in 3 months and get us the talent we need. So we've got to figure out what it is you have to have and line that up with the industries we're trying to grow. We also know that the retirees of 20 years ago are very different than retirees of today. Retirees look a lot more like me. They're in their mid-50s to early 60s. They're not done working. Oftentimes they've got a little pool of cash they want to create, so they want to do something, and they want to do it in a place of access to things they need. They want access to health care, they want access to travel, they want access to high quality of life. And so how do we go back and get those people to have them look at places in our state where they start their business? And I had a very interesting conversation with Tom Ross, who runs the UNC system, and I said, we'd like to see your donor rolls from your alumni. And he says, that's private. I said, no, it's public. And I said, because I want to find out who's been successful and where they are. And if they happen to hit that demographic in that 55 to 60 years old, I'm pretty sure they're kind of tired of shoveling snow in New Jersey, though they shovel snow here on occasion. But a lot of times they're looking to come back home. And if we can create the vehicle for them of why this is a good place for them to come and start their new business or branch out, they're going to make that move if we're aggressive about doing that. In all this kind of conversation, we ran across kind of a real aha. We realized that we weren't paying much attention to our military retirees. And North Carolina is number 4 in terms of returning veterans in the country. Probably not a surprise when you think about the number of military bases we have in the state. We're number 1 in returning star generals. Retiring star generals, number 1 in the country. Smart people, access to cash, access to relationships. And it kind of came home to me. I was having dinner with a CEO in Charlotte of a Fortune 500 back in the fall, and I said, Chris, I said, he was talking about, he's got plants in Eastern Europe, and he says, we'd love to move those back to the U.S. Because the delta for managing that cost is shrinking, logistics are getting very, very difficult, our quality control is problematic. He says, but we can't find the workers. I said, really? I said, what are you looking for? He says, well, we're looking for machinists and welders. I said, do you have any plants in North Carolina? He said, yeah, we got one in Kinston. I said, well, how's that doing? He says, it's doing great. I said, well, you know why? I said, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. I said, it's full of returning veterans who have the very skills that you need. So we're going to begin to align what's coming out of our returning veterans, match those up against the kinds of jobs that are here, link those up with high-end senior military retirees who a lot of times are special forces, have access to defense contracting. You've got some business in this room who talked about what they're, and link that up because this is where they want to be and they want to come back and retire or live with their families. You can't talk about economic development when I talk about education, workforce development. It's married at the hip. And the challenge is how you align these resources. And I was speaking with the president of community college as I was walking in. You all begin to check a bunch of the boxes already. You've got the early college, you've got middle college. You're beginning to align what you do with what the workforce needs, and that's the trick. We have to break down those silos that exist between our really beginning in middle school all the way through high school into the community technical programs into our major 4-year universities. And we've got to change the methodology that says everybody is being trained to try to compete to get admitted to UNC Chapel Hill. Large numbers of our workforce is not where they're going to go. And some are going to obviously choose different 4-year institutions, but large numbers need to be developing curriculums that they can begin to identify at a freshman, sophomore level in high school that begin to track where they go. And we've had a lot of conversations about what that is, and the term STEM is commonly used, and it's exactly correct. How do you provide the science, technology, engineering backgrounds? Those are deficiencies that exist within your manufacturing facilities here. But how do you take away the stigma when that child is moving through school to say, this is exactly where I need to go because I know I can find a career path? And it's not shop. This is advanced manufacturing. This is medical devices. These are the kinds of things that are entrepreneurial driven and are needing those kind of skill sets to move forward. And we've got to make sure we have that clear career design that goes all the way from the time that kid's making that decision on where they need to go, all the way until they've got that certificate, that degree that they'll be successful. We're here on the edge of a lot of rural parts of North Carolina. And agribusiness and agricultural and rural activities have been key to what makes North Carolina special and what makes it grow. There's several recommendations we have in this area. One is what's called the last mile of broadband. I'm sitting here holding my smartphone. I'm very accustomed all the time to having full ability to communicate anywhere I need to be so I can run my business on the move. I can access the files and data I need to have to be successful. But for a significant portion of this state, they don't have that. And I can't imagine trying to operate a business where I can't get to that ability to access internet and high speed to move my information around to my vendors, move it to my employees, move it to the places that I'm trying to sell my product, because I don't have the access to make that happen. And if you align that with your other resources, you talk about what has to happen with your road construction, use of rail, the kinds of things I was telling at lunch, we're at a crossroads here. What makes this place unique is this a crossroads really between 321 and Highway 40. This is where everything has to come through. It's built on a transportation axis. Now I'll just knock this thing off. Let's see if I still make it work. And so we've got to figure out how to align those geographic economic components to make the whole system operate. And one of the things that we know is important is that we've designed the way in which we provide resource and infrastructure on geographic and political bounds, not economic bounds. So, for example, I'll give you a little quick test. Does anybody know why we have 100 counties in North Carolina? Any idea? Because when they drew the county lines back in the mid-1800s, you had to be a half a day horseback from the county seat. Now, how many of y'all came here by horse? Nobody. And so we need to rethink where our economic boundaries are. So if you're in Asheville, where's your economic engine? Spartanburg, Greenville, the inland port. If you're in Charlotte, where's your port? It's Charleston. So you've got to begin to understand how they link up and redesign your delivery systems in a way to understand the connection points. We've got to figure out how to create finish a supply chain within the agricultural world. And that's raw products all the way through prepared products. Sharon Decker will tell you, and it's true, we're the #1 producer of sweet potatoes in the world. #1. Yet we don't have a sweet potato processing plant in North Carolina. How does that happen? How is it we don't understand the connection point between what we make? We don't have adequate refrigeration either at Morehead City or Wilmington. Yet that's where our seafood is coming in. In fact, I heard this week that actually the Japanese are now excited about buying North Carolina flounder. Kind of surprised. I mean, North Carolina's okay, but that's not. I don't view it as a delicacy. It's just kind of what you get when you go to the fish shack. But we've got the capacity to drive what we do in a way if we understand the connection point in our supply chain, and we've never tried to finish that out. You also, I use the term micropolitan. We began to understand there are places like Lenore and Hickory, like Burlington, like Kinston, Rocky Mount, that are the economic centers of areas surrounded by a lot of rural communities and smaller communities. And how do you then identify what makes those successful? What are the components they need? And so we've got a gap analysis going on, try to identify the kind of things you want to try to stimulate that are perhaps missing in the array of services that you need to be competitive against other kinds of places around the country. Community development. I won't get this is kind of wonkish, but you need to understand it. The way in which dollars are delivered through community development are really upside down. And it's a tool that's available at the state level, some by the federal level, to distribute those dollars to alleviate poverty, and they can be used for a variety of things. They've been used historically for things that didn't necessarily make a big difference. And so the challenge is allocating those in a new tiering system that gets the dollars in the hands of the people who can use those effectively to drive economic growth. We know that we've got to provide seed capital to find ways to get ourselves in a position when that site selector is out looking for raw site, raw land, and begin to play a part of allocating prepared sites, allocating some shells, where there's a need for manufacturing activity and they can't find it and they go somewhere else. We're behind in our ability to do that. And if you ask the site selector, there are obviously some facilities that are underutilized. But if you ask site selectors, there are not enough ready-made manufacturing sites in North Carolina, and we get jumped over because they're not here. So we can play a part in trying to get those ready. And then the last area there is talking about Main Street, North Carolina. Part of what makes our smaller communities attractive is a vibrant downtown that has historic tax credits and things that make those things work to keep them healthy and attractive as your economy grows. We want to keep those tools in our pocket. Our committee was full of business people. We had 25 business owners, CEOs, who approached life the same way they approached this job the same way they approached their business. And so we've begun to put together a whole list of metrics and allocations of exactly the kind of things we need to be sure we're doing to carry the plan out. And the next step will be allocating within a matrix how individuals are responsible for particular parts of this plan, and then measure that plan over the coming years. One of the things we're very focused on is how we provide resource delivery across the state. I make the comment, if I'm a shopping center developer in Charlotte, I have to drive to Stanley County to go get my permit for a driveway cut from DOT. Why? It makes no sense. So we want to co-locate the regulatory environment and the access to what you need so that you can do one-stop shop with the folks who you need to get your permits approved to make things happen, as opposed to making you go to them to get it done. Last thing I'll cover, and then take a few moments for questions, is we've got a great opportunity in North Carolina in June of this year when we have both the U.S. Men's and Women's Open in Pinehurst. Our goal is to have our and strategy in place by then, so that when all of the world is looking at North Carolina, we're able to show that of who we are and what we're trying to do as that unique time where all of the world looks at who North Carolina is. So that's our goal. That's where we are. I'll mention just briefly that we've got the partnership up and running. We've hired Dick Lindemuth, who is our new executive director and CEO. He started work about a month ago. He comes from manufacturing. He comes from restructuring, so he's seen the good